This is episode 2 in a multi-part series. To see episode 1, click in the top right corner. The Third Reich had just absorbed Austria, further compounding the Jewish refugee crisis in Europe. In response, US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt called for an international conference to address the humanitarian crisis, which would later be called the Evian Conference. Of the 32 nations present, the Dominican Republic was the only one to increase their visa quotas, agreeing to issue an additional 100,000 visas. However, this was not for humanitarian reasons. Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo did this to regain favor from the international community after murdering over 10,000 Haitians. Furthermore, Trujillo was delighted at the prospect of bringing in many European settlers that would whiten the population, which in his mind would purify Dominican genetics. The intent of using immigrants to develop primitive parts of the Dominican Republic was also a mandate. Trujillo was quoted as saying,
"Efforts to intensify the cultivation of our lands are realized, and at the same time, indirectly, there is a favorable change toward ameliorating our ethnic problem, since this immigrating current bring capable and desirable racial elements to our soil."
While Roosevelt was able to overlook Trujillo's genocidal racism, it was unclear if other US politicians and newspapers would do the same. Increasing visa quotas is fairly easy, but having those visas fulfilled is remarkably more challenging. Trujillo still had all his work ahead of him, and would still need to decide where exactly in the Dominican Republic these Jewish settlers would go. Roosevelt would be left to ponder if other nations, and even his fellow countrymen, would be inspired by the Dominican Republic's kindness and seek to liberalize their own immigration policies. Or would fear and nativism continue to rule over basic human compassion? Pundits following the Evian Conference were quick to point out that Evian spelled backwards is naive. To call the conference a failure does not fully capture the damage these callow diplomats caused. While modern historians point out that none of the attendees really ever intended to liberalize their immigration policies, and really just attended the conference as a token of goodwill towards Roosevelt, one would hope that at least a sense of compassion for the German and Austrian Jews could percolate. In reality, the opposite happened. The attendees of Evian became paranoid of being forced to surrender their sovereignty for all the exiles of the world. If they were to take in German and Austrian Jews, would they be expected to do the same should Poland or Hungary adopt similar anti-Semitic policies? What if South Africa decided to exile all blacks? Or if Australia chose to exile all the Aboriginals? Would it not then be the responsibility of the Evian nations to take in these stateless people as well? After all, France had already taken in 60,000 refugees of the Spanish Civil War, and 30,000 Jewish refugees from their eastern neighbors. Not to mention the French were gracious enough to host this conference. Despite these contributions, they were still being asked to do more. If a nation agreed to help at the Evian Conference, surely they'd be pressured to do more, just like France. This type of thinking echoed in the halls of the Evian Conference, and a few months after, Brazil and Argentina actually restricted their immigration policies. Nazi propagandists did not hesitate to publicize the impotence of Evian nations. It was easy for them to justify their anti-Semitism by highlighting that 31 of the 32 nations were unwilling to aid these Jews. Volkische Beobachter, the official newspaper of the Nazi Party, wrote,
"They weep crocodile tears over the Jews, but nobody is willing to make a sacrifice for these unfortunates, since everyone knows what the Jew means within the national community. Thus, it is impossible not to recognize the fact that those states who themselves refuse to take any Jews merely justify the German Reich's defensive measures against the Jews, measures which are in any case not sufficiently far-reaching."
The goal of Evian was to motivate the global community to help Jews. Instead, It motivated the Nazis to further brutalize Jews while the world watched in cowardice. While Volkische Beobachter is undoubtedly a propaganda publication, free press outlets made similar conclusions of the Evian Conference. The Washington Post called Evian the Yes, But Conference, as all of the delegate speeches could be summarized into one sentence. Yes, we feel sorry for the Jews, but we can't do anything about it. The abundance of weak-willed nations at Evian made Trujillo look like a savior and hero. The dictator would still have prominent critics in the US government and media, but by and large his image transformed from butcher to hero. Trujillo knew that this goodwill would not materialize into favorable trade relations with the United States unless action would be taken on his pledge. Additionally, he genuinely wanted to whiten the Dominican population and develop primitive parts of the country. He had already taken in several thousand Spanish Republicans exiled by Francisco Franco, even though they were a rowdy bunch of anarchists, socialists, and communists. When one Spanish immigrant was asked why Trujillo, a nationalistic strongman who was ideologically similar to Franco, would let in thousands of contrarian troublemakers, the Spaniard quipped, "Because we are white and we can breed." The Spanish Republican colony was only semi-successful in Trujillo's eyes. Most of the Spaniards stayed in their new country and whitened the Dominican population. However, they mostly abandoned their agricultural assignments and eventually moved to the Dominican capital, which at that time was called Ciudad Trujillo. Trujillo could not allow that to happen with the new Jewish colony. He needed the unused land to become developed. To achieve these mandates, he turned to his former rival for help. President Roosevelt. Roosevelt also aspired for the colony to be successful to a certain degree. In sharp contrast to his predecessors, Roosevelt abandoned the Monroe Doctrine of foreign diplomacy in the Americas in favor of the good neighbor policy. To put it briefly, Roosevelt did not favor military interventions in the Western Hemisphere. He believed, and would later be proven correct, that to achieve unity across the Americas, the US must be a good neighbor. The goal of this policy was that Latin America would be more sympathetic to the US government should communism or fascism cross the oceans. This foreign policy also appeased isolationists within the United States. The good neighbor policy led to the withdrawal of US troops from Haiti and Cuba, recognized Mexico's nationalization of foreign oil assets, established cruise lines across the hemisphere, and created both domestic and international propaganda to promote friendliness between the people of the Americas. Disney's Saludos Amigos was a popular piece of good neighbor propaganda, commissioned a few years after the Evian Conference. Trujillo's request complicated Roosevelt's good neighbor policy. On one hand, this was a great opportunity to work directly with a Latin neighbor. On the other hand, it raised the question if Trujillo should be redeemed after the Haitian genocide, another neighbor within the hemisphere. The dilemma caused a fierce debate amongst Roosevelt's inner circle, as the Jewish refugees would need to pass through US waters to reach the Dominican Republic. Roosevelt was unable to take a neutral stance. He would either have to support or reject Trujillo's offer. Beyond diplomacy objectives, there was a military strategic consideration in Roosevelt's contemplation. By working with Trujillo, the US would certainly gain permission to dock their navy in the Dominican Republic. Achieving passage agreements through the means of good neighbor diplomacy, as opposed to the traditional gunboat diplomacy, was much more preferred by Roosevelt. Ultimately, Roosevelt agreed with his Secretary of State, Cordell Hull, and decided to support Trujillo's mission in some capacity. However, Undersecretary of State Sumner Welles hated the idea of working with Trujillo. He could not overlook Trujillo's treatment of Haitians, and thought the US should not be supportive of militaristic dictators. While Undersecretary Welles would dutifully carry out Roosevelt's decision, he would keep a suspicious eye on Trujillo, and continue to be critical of the dictator in private government meetings. After Roosevelt's endorsement, Secretary Hull was quick to provide Trujillo with all the experts he needed. A small army of immigration lawyers, labor experts, soil scientists, land surveyors, so-called eugenic scientists, and many other experts were dispatched from the United States to work with Trujillo's inner circle. Even with all this collaboration, more expertise was still needed. How would Trujillo actually get settlers to come to the Dominican Republic? And more importantly, how would this be paid for? While Roosevelt was happy to share government experts, the cost of relocating 100,000 people from Europe to the Dominican Republic would cost about $15 million in today's money. There would be no political will for such an expense during the Great Depression. To resolve the issue of logistics, recruitment, and finances, Trujillo started a partnership with the New York-based philanthropic organization, the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, commonly abbreviated as the JDC. The JDC was helmed by prominent New York corporate attorney James Rosenberg and the acclaimed Russian-born agronomist Joseph Rosen. While the JDC's main mission was to provide rescue and relief for Jews around the world, Rosenberg and Rosen also had some idealistic and spiritual motives. Both men were aware that much of the anti-Semitism stemmed from the accusation that Jews were urbanites, who didn't actually produce anything material. Popular anti-Semitism at the time claimed that Jews would take on professions in law, banking, or retail that ultimately hindered societal progress. Rosen and Rosenberg believed, perhaps with credulity, that by training large numbers of urban Jews to become farmers, the pulse of anti-Semitism would weaken. Spirituality also played a role for these men. They believed that the smoke-filled skies of industrialized cities was corrosive to the soul. God's presence could only be experienced in the nature He created. The instant gratification that is commonplace in urban life stunts spiritual growth. By becoming a farmer, one would become better in tune with the natural world and become closer to God's harmony. In 1927, Rosenberg observed about his fellow urban Jews.
The city Jew. Nervous, impatient, fidgety, restless, and eager. Little by little, he learns to adjust himself to the even disposition of the animal. Learns something of the value of slow, steady, deliberate, patient work. He can't hurry his ox, his crops, the sunshine, springtime. He becomes a part of the deep current of nature, thank God.
This may sound hypocritical coming from a New York lawyer, but Rosenberg came to his epiphany of naturalism after he was already an established lawyer. He owned over 1,000 acres in the Adirondack Mountains, where he spent most of his summers fishing for trout. Had he been a more selfish man, he probably would have retired there instead of undertaking the philanthropic duties of the JDC. He would later observe that,
I have never encountered anti-Semitic sunshine, storms, trees, brooks, forests, or mountains.
Rosenberg and Rosen should not be considered as head-in-the-clouds idealists, as they knew how to get results. During the Russian Revolution and Civil War, the JDC was able to relocate over 150,000 Russian Jews from cities to the plains of northern Crimea and southern Ukraine. Perhaps equally as impressive, when the war ended and it became clear that the Bolsheviks would become the new rulers of Russia, the JDC was able to negotiate with Stalin and eventually earn his blessing for this aggro colony. As if their resumes weren't already impressive enough, both Rosenberg and Rosen were very talented fundraisers. and were capable of getting contributions from the upper class of the United States. Trying to relocate 100,000 people from Europe to the Caribbean is not a cheap endeavor, but the JDC was capable of obtaining these funds. These four men made for an unlikely team, one that could have only been brought together from the seemingly random currents of foreign politics. While there was good reason for optimism in the Americas, most could not foresee the horror that was about to be cast over Europe. I hope you enjoyed learning about this history as much as I enjoyed documenting it. Be sure to subscribe to see future episodes in this series. A big thank you to all my patrons, including VIP patron Stephen Marney. I'm currently losing money on this video series, but you can help cover production costs and get your name in the credits by supporting this channel on Patreon. A link to my Patreon page is in the description. If Patreon isn't your thing, please consider using the Amazon link in the description the next time you shop online. The link will direct you to the book Tropical Zion by Alan Wells, which was a major source for this episode in particular. You don't need to buy this book to help this channel. Anything you buy from Amazon from that link will help provide some funding for this channel. A big thank you to Hugh Baver, founder and chairman of the Sasua 75 nonprofit. Hugh has been a major help throughout this video series. If you or your family are connected to this history and want to be preserved in the historical record, please get in touch with Sasua 75. Their website is linked in the description. If you agree with Hugh and I that this history should be remembered, one of the best things you can do is simply share this video. A tremendous thank you to fellow YouTubers Rich from Manfro Entertainment and Kyle from Anti-Wisdom. Manfro Entertainment is a channel with witty takes on pop culture, and Anti-Wisdom has some hysterical Minecraft videos. Both of their contributions to this episode are greatly appreciated. Be sure to check out their channels by clicking here.